going to talk about some branding issues. In particular, we're going to discuss briefly what brands are and why positioning is particularly important. We're also going to talk a little bit about strategic issues on how you organize groups of brands. Most companies don't have just one brand, they have multiple brands. So how can you basically provide some sort of framework to organize that set of brands? And then we're going to move and talk not only about brands but also about experiences. And I will kind of try to suggest why experiences are probably where the action is going to be in the next 10 years. And outline a little bit how experience and design works. Okay. So this outlines what I just said, so I'm going to move on, right? So what is a brand? And a brand, for the most part, is a promise of value that we make to a customer. Okay, so what do I mean by this? If marketing is about value creation and value sharing with customers, then the brand is what stands behind this promise of future value that is going to be created by the company. So what we're essentially doing is we are establishing a reputation, a contract for the future of what we are going to do for our customers. And what stands behind that promise of value is the brand or the name of the organization. Okay. So brands are one of the most important assets for any firm. Okay. In fact, there are famous examples of companies like Coca-Cola where their old CEO used to say that you can keep all our assets, and a large company like Coca-Cola has lots of assets that includes property and machinery and trucks, etc., etc. And I will just keep our brand, and in the long term, I will do a lot better than you will. And he's right, right? The valuation of some of the top brands is in the billions or trillions of dollars. Okay. So brands are very important. The reason why they are important is because customers trust the brands, right? And brands enable customers to make decisions about products because they know what the product stands for. Okay. And the reason why this is the case is because behind the brand there is a whole host of psychological associations that the customer has made with the brand, right? So there are cognitive associations and emotional meaning behind it. What does this mean? This means that after you've been exposed to the brand over and over again and you have had multiple experiences with the brand, what you do is you create some psychological linkages to what the brand experience is going to be like in the future. Okay, so when you, for example, go to a particular hotel chain like Ritz-Carlton, right, and you've been there in the past, there are a certain set of experiences that you have had with the company, maybe not only staying there, but also through advertising or maybe stories that you have heard from other customers. Okay, and those develop this strong association between the brand and things like luxury, for example. Right? And these associations is what makes the brand valuable, right? When multiple consumers agree or have a similar cognitive association with the brand, is what makes that brand powerful and valuable ultimately for the organization. Now, to make sure that these associations are strong and they are consistent across consumers, it is very important every time that a customer has a contact with the brand in any of its forms, that the experience that they actually receive is similar or consistent. So consistency across any touch points with the brand is what's going to make these emotional meanings and cognitive associations become strong and ultimately consistent across consumers. And this is what's going to make the brand valuable in the future. Now, when we're talking about brands, different brands are going to have different meanings or associations in the minds of consumers. And this association is built, hopefully, actively by the organization. Okay. So this is something that you pick strategically. What it is that do you think will be the best positioning or the best meaning for your brand in the marketplace. Now, the way to do this is there are different ways in which you can basically position your brand. Okay, the most basic, and maybe I will argue one of the most important ones, is by basically using different benefits that customers care about, right? So you can have a car company like Volvo, for example, that have basically put a lot of emphasis over the last at least 40 years on emphasizing their safe cars, right? So safety is the benefit that they are emphasizing for their products. And when you hear about cars and safety, you usually think about Volvo. The reason why this happens is because they've been hammering this message over time. And not only that, but they actually make products that usually perform well in safety tests, right? So it's not just talking, it's also doing. Okay, so when we're talking about positioning and we're talking about building brands, we're not just talking about cheap talk, we're talking about both communication but also actions that will make sure that the experiences of the customers are associated with this particular benefit. Same thing can be done with price, right? So you can have low prices. Walmart, for example, is a brand that is associated with low prices, and so it is another strategic avenue that you can take when it comes down to positioning your brand, right? A different one will be to try to position your brand based on a particular usage of the product or an application, right? So for example, water, which is one of my favorite product categories because you tend to think about it as a commodity, but you can also position yourself in a space like that, right? So you can have vitamin water, for example, who advertises and communicates their product and builds the product around a particular usage, which is active or workouts, right? So water for your workouts, that's one of their slogans, right? So basically not just a benefit, right? But also build that benefit around a particular application that people are going to be using that either product or service for. Okay. Another area that you could use for positioning will be quality, right? And remember, quality, it's perceived quality. So, both the communication aspects and also improving the quality will be important, right? So objective and subjective, both. Because remember, perception is reality for customers. It's not just about what it is, it's what they think it is. We'll see some of this in the case. And finally, you can also position yourself against the competition, right? Doing something different or dissimilar to the competition and letting people know about it, right? So, for example, if you take a company like JetBlue, right, and one of the things that they did is they tried to differentiate their offerings. They are airline, right? So they take people from one city to another in planes, right? They kind of steer clear of what everybody else is doing in the industry by providing snacks on flights, and not only just plain snacks but also gourmet snacks, and also providing extra legroom, which is one of the key complaints, right? And you have here a little piece that basically talks about how the company is trying to emphasize the fact that they are doing this, right? We are providing you benefits that the competition does not provide in this case. Okay, and all these different strategic options are possible and valuable when it comes down to building brands. So you just need to pick an avenue and develop and stick to it. Good. Here you have another example of another product where you can see different positionings taken by different companies in the marketplace, right? Notice one thing that it's important. You have here what I've written here as attributes or slash benefits, right? And so this is what the customer is interested in, potentially interested in, at least some customers. But notice here what I have in the chart is also the different segments. This is important to acknowledge because not all positionings are going to work for all customers. So the positioning needs to be targeted to a particular user for the most part, right? And for it to click. So positioning and segments kind of they need to marry together. Okay. So here I have different things that you may be interested in when it comes down to a toothpaste, right? So you have flavor, color, whether it actually whitens the teeth, right? Fresh breath, this is not a feature of the product, but this is a benefit that you will get, right? Decay prevention, price, right? Always a feature, right? Plaque prevention and stain prevention. Okay. So what I've done here is you can see you have different segments, right? First you have children, then we have teens, right, or maybe young adults. You have families and adults. And so as you can see, you have certain brands in the marketplace, the brands you have here at the bottom, that have picked specific segments that they are targeting, and based on that, they use the attributes or benefits that are either valued or demanded by these customers, right? So if you ask my kids, although my kids are getting a little bit older now, but when they were young kids, what do young kids care about? Well, mostly it's about how it tastes and whether it has bright colors or something that makes it exciting, right? And more than any of the other health-related aspects, which obviously a kid doesn't care about, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to build the positioning of the brand along the line of benefits or attributes that are relevant and valuable for the segment in case, right? For the segment that you're trying to target, okay? You have the same thing with maybe young adults. You know about this more than I do, but what do you care about? Maybe you care about appearance, right? You're, although we're socially distanced right now, it seems like hopefully you still will get a little bit of socializing. So, looking attractive for other peers, it's something that to one degree or another everybody cares, right, about. And the same thing, fresh breath, right? Because you need to kiss somebody, I guess, right? Good. What about families? What if you're a parent and you have some kids? What would you care about? Well, I have here two basic things, right? Decay prevention, right? You care about the health of your kids and maybe your spouse too, right? And yourself. And price, right? So these are more, I don't know if I want to say frugal, but yeah, when you have more people that are buying toothpaste for, maybe price becomes a little bit more of an issue, right? And then finally, I have here for adults plaque prevention and stain prevention. And you can see the brands associated with them. So certain brands have chosen this particular position, and because of that, they emphasize these attributes in their communications and also in their R&D when they're actually building new products. Okay. Now, I've shown you a number of brands. You could also have one brand that tries to target multiple customers with maybe modifications of the brand. We'll talk about those later. But what if you're a large organization that has multiple brands? How do you basically organize that set of brands in a way that is strategically meaningful, right? How do you have some sort of a scaffolding that enables you to decide, A, how many brands you should have, and B, maybe more importantly, how each of these brands should be positioned and connected to each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about this concept of a brand architecture, which is essentially how to look at it from a strategic perspective when you have a collection of brands or a portfolio of brands. Okay. So when you're in a situation like this, the reason why it will be useful to have some sort of architecture behind it is because it will enable you to coordinate the efforts that you are actually exerting from a marketing perspective. Effort means time and dollars spent, right? In advertising, in promotions, in maybe building new brands, etc. Right? And make sure that all the efforts are actually consistent, right? And from a consumer's perspective, it might actually be useful because it will enable you to basically have common associations, common cognitive associations for different brands within this architecture. Okay, so let's look at maybe a little bit more graphically what I mean by architecture for brand. The idea behind architecture is this idea of building consistency at the same time that you enable different values for different brands, right? So how can you be consistent and different at the same time? Well, the idea is you allow that change, but you allow that change in a way that is strategically meaningful, right? So what you're going to do is you're going to start first with your corporate brand, right? And that's going to be basically what's going to dictate the overarching idea for all the set of brands that you're going to have. Okay, it kind of sets up the genetic code, right? So it's going to say what the company is about, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to modify that by acknowledging the fact that the company is going to be probably servicing different markets, different customers, different segments, right? So what you're going to need is you're going to need to basically enable your brand or brands to speak directly to those different markets or those different customers. And to do that, what you're going to do is you're going to move from the corporate brand to maybe modifying that brand using strategies like sub-branding or ingredient branding that I will talk about later. This enables you to basically modify the existing corporate brand in a way that makes it more meaningful to specific maybe industries or product categories. Okay, and then below this, what you're going to be able to do is basically target specific segments with maybe specific benefits, right? And to do that, you might have product brands that are, somewhat distinct or very distinct from the original brand at the corporate level. Okay, so let me show you some examples of this. Here you have an example, for example, for Microsoft, and you probably all know Microsoft. It's a large software company, although they do make some products like Xbox, right? But for the most part, software company, right? Services and software company. So here you can see they have their corporate brand, right, which is going to sit at the top of this architecture or this hierarchy, right? And then they have two very distinct segments. They have their commercial side, which is their business to business part, and then they have the consumer side. Okay, so these are going to be two distinct segments that are going to be serving. Of course, it might be that some of the products are useful for both sides, but there's going to be specific products and specific product brands that are going to be associated with each of those segments, right? So here you have some sub-brands, for example. They have Windows Server, for example, is one of the sub-brands, or Microsoft Dynamics, which is a CRM, a customer relationship management software. This is probably software that you have never used unless you've worked maybe in an internship. What this enables a company to do is to basically use their data to provide analytics that will give you, some insight as to what kind of decisions will be meaningful for that specific customer. So maybe you can sell them a particular coupon or enable you to make decisions about who your sales force should be calling from your potential set of customers that you already have in your database. Okay. They also have Microsoft Office, right, which is also a sub-brand of Microsoft, right? We'll see what sub-brands are in a minute, but and then they have the consumer side with mostly, I would say, more successful part will be Xbox, right, which is a unique product brand that is created for the consumer market. They do have some platform brands that cut across both sets of customers, in particular Windows, right, which is probably one of their, if not their most successful line of products. And then they also use some ingredient branding, which we'll see what it is in a minute, with this .net, right? So here you have this idea of having some sort of cohesive idea about how to basically structure your brands, and this will be the brand architecture that Microsoft has been using at least for the last 10 years, roughly. Now, strategically, that brand architecture, it's going to basically give you two very distinctly broad choices, okay? On one hand, you're going to have some companies that are going to choose to have brands that are very individualized to each product category and each segment that they serve, okay? And the name usually given to this, if you read the article I hope you did for this week, is a house of brands, right? Where basically what you're doing is you're having a whole host of brands that are not obviously at least linked to each other. Okay, so somebody who is not in the know because they read a lot about the industry might not actually know that all these brands are owned by the same company. Okay. On the other hand, the alternative to that strategy is to basically use umbrella branding. What is umbrella branding? Umbrella branding is where every product in every segment is connected because there is an overarching or an umbrella brand that is basically used across all product categories, across all users, and that enables you to have a consistent set of brand associations, right? Now, obviously, these two strategies, which are polar opposite of each other, they have both strengths and weaknesses, right? So what are the strengths of individual branding? Well, the biggest strength of individual branding is that it enables you to basically, because all these brands are unique and they are not in principle related to each other, it enables you to target that brand uniquely to the benefits that are necessary for that particular either application or segment, right? So what this is going to give you is it's going to give you the maximum level of customization, let's say. So the perceived positioning of the brand is going to be totally unique, and because of that, you're going to be able to match exactly what it is that you're trying to achieve, right? Now, what is the downside of this, right? This inherent flexibility. The downside of this is it's a lot more difficult to do, right? Because how do you build a brand from scratch, right? It requires a huge investment in terms of marketing, capital, and time, right? And brands are built over time. So it enables you to position it very accurately. It gives you a lot of flexibility. But on the other hand, it requires really heavy investment and it's really not leveraging your existing assets properly, right? Which is essentially what the branded house enables you to do. In a branded house situation where everything uses the same brand, like for example, General Electric uses, for the most part, a branded house. What this enables the company to do by selling anything from toasters to nuclear reactors using the same brand name, which is General Electric, and maybe with slight modifications. We'll talk about sub-branding next. But what it enables General Electric to do is basically leverage that reliable technology and perception, right? Those brand associations that you have built over time about, getting the job done and being a reasonable value for money. It's something that it might apply to many product categories, and that enables you to maybe enter multiple different industries with the same brand name by leveraging these assets. This enables you to basically enter the markets easier because it doesn't take you so long to actually build the brand. The brand's already there. You leverage that brand to basically use across multiple markets. What is the downside? It's very risky, right? Because if you enter a new market and actually things don't go well, it spreads to your entire corporate persona, right? Your brand, any mistakes that happen in any product category, it's going to spread to all perceptions of the brand in all the product categories, because guess what? It's the same brand after all, right? So these two very distinctive strategies are going to basically try to play one flexibility versus the other one, which is trying to leverage your assets and move as quickly as possible. And what's going to happen is most companies are going to be somewhere in between these two strategies. So let me walk you through some more granular distinction between these two extremes from a strategy perspective. Here you have, and this is from an article written by the same author of the article you have to read for this week. If you're interested, the library also has the article. But you can see here you have all the different branding strategies, starting from the house of brands, where everything is unique. Where here, everything is unique. All the brands have their own brand name and their own set of associations, to here, where everything uses essentially the same identity, the same brand name to enter multiple product categories, right? So, and of course you have some strategies in between, okay, which I'm going to talk about quickly, okay? So here you have brands that are not connected to each other, right? So this is when there is no relationship between what we call the parent brand and any other brands in the portfolio of brands. So here you have, for example, electronics company RCA, which in principle, unless you know that it's owned by General Electric, you wouldn't be able to tell that they are indeed related. Okay, or if you like cars, Rolls-Royce, for example, you might not know that they are owned by BMW. Okay, good. There is a slight variation on not being connected, this idea of the shadow endorser, which is that the company sort of lets you know, maybe in the back of the packaging, for example, in the case of Tide, right, that it's made by Procter & Gamble. So if you flip the package, it doesn't say it in the front, so it's not something that is prominent, but if you read through all the small print, you'll be able to see that it's a P&G company. P&G stands for Procter & Gamble, which has a whole host of brands that you may use on a regular basis, right? Like Tide, like Gillette, etc., etc. Okay, and so there is a little bit of an endorsement here, but it's definitely not a prominent thing. It's not something that is done purposefully. So it's moving you a little bit farther to the leveraging your brands, but it doesn't do it obviously. Same thing with Toyota and Lexus, right? Good. Then you have endorsed brands. This is where the parent company's name appears in some way, so that you can leverage that corporate identity into the brand that you're using, right? So, and you have slightly different variations on this, right? From strong endorsers to just token endorsers, which will be the weakest, right? So here you have some examples you can read through. For example, for Nestle, company like Nestea, right? It kind of lets you know already in the name, right? Or McMuffin, right? I think you know where this parent brand comes from, right? Etc. Okay, so this is basically trying to leverage to some degree the parent brand, so it's not independent like it was in these cases. Okay, but it's not as clear as in the case of a sub-brand. What is a sub-brand? That's where you use directly the name of the company and then you modify it with a secondary brand that adds some texture to the cognitive associations that have been built by the company. Like for example, you have Gillette, which obviously in this case the parent brand, although I guess the parent brand will be Procter & Gamble, right? And then you have Mac 3, right? Or I don't know what number we're at right now, Mac 5 or whatever. They probably have even changed the name by now, right? And what else do we have here? HP does this, right? With their printers. So here you have the DeskJet, right? Okay, good. And then finally here at the end, you have, like I said before, when the company uses the same brand name for pretty much everything, right? Like G, I was talking about, so G Capital, right? Which is their financial arm of General Electric. And this basically provides loans, right? And etc. Okay, so you can see how, from a strategic perspective, there are a whole host of choices that you have. You can go all the way from treating all your brands independently, which is what it's a house of brands, to treating everything under the same umbrella, okay, which is a branded house, okay? And they all have advantages and disadvantages, but what most companies do is they try to leverage both of them by using the strategies here in the middle. So let me talk a little bit more about those. So what are the roles that a brand can have within this hierarchy? The driver brand is the main the main brand, right? So this is basically what's gonna, in many cases, be the most important brand, and is what's gonna drive the purchase decision, right? So in the case of the Dell case, we did Dell computers, right? That will be the driver brand. An endorser brand is where the brand name is associated with the new brand, but it's not in the direct part of the name, right? So here you have, for example, Korean by DuPont, right? So if you're buying a new home, right, you might be considering having solid surface in your kitchen cabinets. This is something that maybe you don't care about yet, but when you're thinking about buying a home, maybe this will be relevant. So when DuPont was trying to launch a new brand in this space, what they did is they tried to leverage their existing brand DuPont, which is known for doing magic almost with chemistry, right? to basically launch a product that instantly became reasonable in many people's eyes because it was endorsed by DuPont, by the main brand itself. Okay, by the way, Korean is a brand owned by the DuPont, right? Or the same thing, Polo by Ralph Lauren, right? So if you are into clothing, right, what you're doing is you're endorsing the new brand, which in this case will be Polo, by the parent brand, and try to provide the strength or cognitive associations that were already built in the main brand. And then finally, you have a sub-brand, which is where the main brand plays an important role, but the sub-brand modifies that, right? It enables you to basically provide new associations that will be maybe valuable by the customers that are going to be buying that product or that are relevant to that product category, right? So, for example, Lenovo ThinkPad, right? So Lenovo is a computer manufacturer, right? And I think it's the company that actually bought all the physical assets and brands when it comes down to PCs for IBM, right? When they sold them in around 2000, if I remember correctly. And so when it comes down to laptops, what they do is they have a sub-brand, which is the ThinkPad brand, which actually was established by IBM. And yeah, so what this is trying to do is trying to modify or soften basically the main brand, which will be Lenovo, and make it more applicable and have more direct connection to the product category that it's trying to target, which in this case will be laptops, right? So a ThinkPad. Okay, the name tells you. Okay. So let me go over what sub-branding is again. I think it's very important. What sub-branding is a technique that is used by adding to an existing brand a new subordinate brand, right, or a secondary brand, that what it enables you to do is try to have the best of both worlds, which is try to add some new specific brand associations, something new that the brand stands for, right, that the parent brand didn't have before, like ThinkPad in the case of Lenovo, right, while simultaneously leveraging the core assets that you have already built over time in your parent brand, right, in your main brand. So the brand Lenovo, right, stands for, I don't know, dependable, good value, whatever it is, right? So in this case, what you're trying to do with sub-branding is trying to use the best of both worlds. Leverage your existing brands, but on the other hand, enable you to build some flexibility into it by adding a subordinate brand that enables you to create a new position, or at least a modified position from the existing brand, right? So this enables you to hopefully do things faster and with a reduced amount of risk because you can leverage your parent brand in this new brand creation. So what does the sub-branding enables you to do? Well, it gives you more flexibility, like I was saying, and you can see that in some of these examples, right? So for example, it enables you to emphasize a particular point of difference, right? So you have G Space Saver, right? So when you're building your new kitchen, if you want to install a device that enables you to extract the fumes from cooking, right? And on the other hand, you don't have a lot of room, so you want to have a microwave put in the wall somehow. Space Saver enables you to combine these two concepts, right? The microwave and the extractor, and by doing that, it's going to give you a little bit more room. So what it's doing with the brand name is actually trying to convey what kind of benefits are you getting from using the products, in this case, that the company is going to sell. Okay, good. It might also give you an idea about the usage of the product, or who is going to be likely to use or be interested in it, like Microsoft Office, right? So if you're trying to improve your productivity, this might actually be useful, right? Or it might give you an idea about what kind of options or features are going to come with it. So Holiday Inn Express, right, for a quick trip, right, or for business, I guess. And so it's not maybe for family vacation, so it also excludes who might not be so interested in the product. And it might enable you to build uh, within the parents association. So Samsung Galaxy, right? So where it goes from just technology in general to maybe next generation, um, higher in the latest and greatest technology in a box. In this case, in a smartphone format or tablet, right? And finally, ingredient branding, which is a similar strategy in the sense that it's trying to also leverage your existing assets to try to build new products. But here the idea, instead of just taking your corporate brand and adding a subordinate brand to it, the idea is taking one component or one part of your product or products and brand it on its own, and such that if anything else is using that component in one of the other products or services, you can just emphasize that branded item it's part of the product. That might enable you to enhance the perception of the new product that you're creating, right? Examples of these, probably the most famous one in the PC market will be Intel Inside. This was an extremely successful campaign that started around the 90s, and it really built a silicon empire, right? And which is fascinating because if you think about computers, most people don't know what kind of brand are many of their components, but they do know what their CPU is. So you might not know whether your memory is made by SanDisk or Corsair. You might not know who makes your hard drive, but you probably know whether your chip is an Intel chip or AMD, right? Those are the two large chip manufacturers when it comes down to PCs, right? So Intel Inside was a very, very successful campaign where they basically enabled the company really to leverage this brand and basically make tons of money as a company just because now suddenly people care about what kind of chip was on their computer, which is not something that happens in many other product categories, right? Okay. And what else do we have here? Oh, Goretech, another one. Also, yeah, Teflon, which is made by DuPont, and Dolby noise reduction system, right? Notre Suite. There are many companies that have tried to leverage their assets by using this component or ingredient branding strategy. Now, in general, what we find in the empirical literature about ingredient branding is that if basically the ingredient brand has a perceived brand presence that it's more positive than the new brand that it's been created or the new product that is created, then ingredient branding works really well because it kind of legitimizes the new product by leveraging this component that everybody knows it's of certain quality and certain status, right? On the other hand, if the host product, if the new product that you are creating with this ingredient branding, it's already of certain stature, we see that having the ingredient brand doesn't really add anything or pretty little to it. So ingredient branding is a strategy that works really well when you're building new brands using the components, but when you already have existing strong brands, ingredient branding is maybe not so useful for the organization. And now that we've talked a little bit about brands, let me finish up the last few slides by discussing something that I see is a huge trend in most industries, which is this idea of moving towards customer experiences. Now, what is a customer experience? It's basically the gestalt or the overall interaction between the customer and the organization, right? Considering all moments of truth and all points of contact. So basically, from the moment that the customer thinks about a product or a service till the moment that the transaction is complete and the product's actually used by or the service is provided by the company, and we're going to call that whole host of activities the customer experience. And we're going to see in a minute that this enables brands to position themselves in many more ways the moment that you only think about Products, you're more limited, but when you think about experiences overall, this opens up the floodgates of all possibilities that you can use to differentiate your product. So let me walk you through where experiences fit in. Let's start with how marketing used to be 100 years ago and how it's starting to change because of customers' experiences. So if you go back about 100 years, right, everybody will look at marketing from the perspective of basically sales, right? If you have a product, you can just put it in the marketplace, and because there is not a lot of competition, people will buy it, right? So this is where you basically are talking about getting things from the ground, then maybe modifying it, right, and just selling it. And now, when you just have a commodity, something like water or salt or oil, right? These are hard to market, and the reason why they are difficult to market is because pretty much everything within certain standards is the same, right? If you have salt and I have salt, it's kind of hard to market it as a unique product. Now, the moment that you add some labor to this, right, and you modify it, you change it, maybe you add a different and unique package to that salt, right? Maybe you are, I don't know, maybe you do something to it to make it more useful. Maybe you have a refining process that enables the salt to be cleaner or to mix better with other components, right? So the moment that you do something to it and you make it a product, this enables you as a company to basically compete in more ways, right? You're not just now competing on how cheap is your product, because now you can do something else. Now you can maybe make a package that is more convenient for a customer. And because of that, they may be willing to pay a little bit more for a product that it's not a commodity anymore, right? Now, from here, you go to delivering a service, right? Now, services are nice because they enable you to basically build more things around, right? So in the case of salt, maybe you can have a delivery service where, let's say, every 3 months, you get a package of salt that it's sent to you, and maybe you have, I don't know, never come up with a salt delivering package service, but maybe you can have different types of salt that are provided to you over time, and that way you get to try new things like, I don't know, Himalayan salt or sea salt from the, I don't know, the Dead Sea. I have no idea, by the way, that's a thing, okay? But the moment that you start building the service around the product, that enables you to differentiate the product even further, right? Because now you're adding more components to it, and that enables you to be more unique in the marketplace, right? So as you keep moving in this direction, I want you to see that what's happening is you have more degrees of freedom in how you can differentiate yourself from other existing businesses, okay? And that ultimately, if you are successful and you do a good job, means that you're going to be perceived as more unique by the consumer, and they're going to be more interested in buying your product as opposed to a product in the marketplace. And here is where experiences come in. Experiences are a combination of products and services that enable you to solve a customer problem, okay? And by that definition of an experience, and there is a whole host of things that you can use to solve that customer problem. And because of that, you're going to have many ways of differentiating yourself from the competition. So here you have the customer experience from the perspective of what kind of activities that the customer engages on. Okay, so if you remember your consumer behavior class, when we're talking about decision making with products, usually you start with problem recognition. Then after you recognize that you have a problem or an opportunity, you're going to do some search, right? Search for information so that you know what kind of products or services can help you solve this, right? And then what you do is you evaluate those products or services, right? By maybe looking at the different benefits that they provide. You make a purchase. Then you might have to install that product, right? So that it actually works. The installation may be simple, just opening the box. In some cases, in other cases, you might have cables involved, you might have software involved. It depends, right? Then you're going to use it for whatever intended purpose you have. You might have to maintain the product. You might need to get some support for the product, okay? Sometimes you will realize that because there is added new features that you might have to, or you might want to upgrade, etc., etc. So I want you to realize that in this set of activities, the organization, the company, can be involved in all of them to some degree or another. And this is what's going to create your perception of the overall experience that you have with the firm, right? So let's look at an example of how you can actually use this concept of experience to create a unique proposition or a unique position for a company. Okay, so here you have HP, like Herbert Parker, right? So, from the moment that you become aware that, you have a problem, right? So for example, let's think about what is the main product for HP. They sell computers, they sell printers, but for the most part, if you look at their bottom line, probably the most profitable part of their company is the ink for the printers, right? So maybe you notice that your ink cartridge is out, right? And now what we try to do is we try to make choosing our product as easy as possible. So one thing that you might notice if you have an HP printer is when your printer cartridge is out, what happens? There's a message that pops out from software that HP has asked you to install. We install the drivers for the printer that tells you, we noticed that your printer is low on ink. Maybe it hasn't run out yet. And what we are suggesting you do is that you actually buy our ink from us, right? We might direct you to our website. We might provide you a service where you can just let us send you ink whenever we notice it's low. You don't even need to actually worry about ordering it. We'll order it for you, right? We'll get you on a schedule where whenever that message shows up, we automatically will put on the order for you. This will be, for example, useful, especially in an office setting, right? Then, we might give you directions on how you can actually install it. Maybe we'll provide you with a YouTube video that clearly explains for your particular model how it is that you install this ink, right? Then once that you actually use it, right, we might actually provide or suggest some more products that we have in our line that will enable you to do a better job with whatever it is that you're doing. So for example, if you're printing in color, we might suggest that if you're printing pictures, you buy some more of our HP paper for pictures, that it has a glossy finish to it, and it's going to make the pictures look more professional, right? And we might be able to provide some support for you. And once that the product is going to be disposed, we might actually help you with the recycling process. So I want you to realize that if you look at this circle of consumer behavior and all the different activities, if you look at each of these as an opportunity to differentiate your product and your brand, and this opens up a whole host of opportunities and unique situations that if you're just thinking only about HP is about printers, they don't exist. So this, from a positioning perspective, it enables you to have much more flexibility and hopefully do a better job at what the customers really want, which is ultimately why we're here, hopefully. Okay.